Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and let's begin. Let's begin with a prayer. Let me invite Father Tom, our chaplain, to make a prayer. Adri?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
So, as you all know, Father Thomas belongs to the Claretians, and it's a congregation of missionaries, sons of the Immaculate Heart of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And their motto is to light the whole world on fire with the love of God. So I have a prayer to open us up, the apostolic prayer of St. Anthony Mary Claret, founder of the congregation. O my God and Father, grant that I may know you and make you known, that I may love you and bring others to love you, that I serve you and inspire others to serve you, that I praise you and work that all your creatures praise you. Grant, my Father, that all sinners be converted, that all the just persevere in grace, and all of us reach eternal glory. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Father. My name is Alfredo Ortiz Aragon. I'm the chair of the dissertation committee for Father Thomas Thennadiyil. And welcome. Thank you for all of you for coming. I'm going to introduce Dr. Julie Nadeau, who is in our School of Nursing here in Incarnate Word, and Dr. John de la Garza, who is in our School of Professional Studies. And the three of us make up his overall committee. And the way this is going to work is, in about 30 seconds, I'm going to hand this over to, oh, you already have a microphone. I'm going to pass it over to Father Thomas, and he's going to present his study in some good detail. And then the three of us will have a small number of questions that we're going to ask him, because it's considered a public defense. And after he answers those questions, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Probably have time for 3 to 7 questions. We'll see where we are time-wise. And so we'll ask people who have questions. So if you have questions that pop up as he's giving his presentation, have those ready so that you can ask them when we get to that point. After that, Father Thomas will lead us in a little bit of an explanation as to how we move into the food phase of the evening, which I realize some of us have come for that reason, including the three of us for sure. But he'll say more about that at that time. So without further ado, I present to you Father Thomas Thennadiyil.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lourdes, and thank you everybody for being present here today. Are we okay? Hello. So this is the title of the dissertation, and this is a presentation, the overview of the presentation that I'm going to make today. And let me talk about the context and need of this study. I need to talk about myself in the first place. I've been a religious priest for 22 years now, and I belong to the International Congregation of Claretian Missionaries. And up until the time that I came here in 2015, my ministry was back in India. And for nearly a decade, in the latter half of my ministry was in Catholic higher education in India. First as a faculty, I used to teach at a Jesuit school for a while. Then our religious congregation, we began an undergraduate school. And so I was into teaching there and also into administration, into leadership for a while. And so this research is in the context of my experiences from Catholic higher education, my belief in the efficacy of Catholic higher education And also the challenges that I faced in getting lay leaders on board, in transmitting, a quality mission-based Catholic higher education. So that is my personal reason for this research. Secondly, you would know over last 60 years in this country, there has been a big transition that has happened in terms of leadership in Catholic higher education. Because of the declining number of priests and religious, we have this number in 2018, data provided by Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities. 71% of presidents of Catholic colleges and universities in this country are lay people. 71%. That was in 2018. Now that could be even more. And increasingly, there is lay leadership in Catholic higher education at the top level, more so at the mid-level. Deans and chairs of departments, that number could be even more. And so there is this prominence of lay leadership in Catholic higher education today. And the third reason is the redefining role of laity by Second Vatican Council. The Second Vatican Council, 1962, was a watershed moment in the history of the Catholic Church. Laity is no longer considered even collaborators, but they are called co-sharers in the ministry of the Church. And documents define laity, they're supposed to live and sanctify the world, living within the world. And one big opportunity for lay people, for laity to exercise their ministry in the Church is through this, being leaders in Catholic higher education. So I'm relating that context and that need into this research as well. Fourthly, the reason for this research also relates to the role of academic leadership in Catholic higher education. By the term academic leadership, I mean the mid-level leadership. Deans in the hierarchy of leadership, deans downwards. Coordinators, deans and chairs of departments, they have a very, very powerful role in transmitting the mission of the university. Look at it this way, an average tenure of presidents is, say, 5 to 7 years. But you would find deans and faculty members, chairs, who would stay on for 20 years, 30 years, perhaps the whole career they spend in the university, and they have a tremendous responsibility in transmitting the mission and identity of the university. Next, importance of mission and identity integration. That is said to be the most difficult challenge that Catholic higher education faces today, because faculty and leaders that we get, many of them traditionally literate, because they didn't have their education in Catholic institutions. They may have had their degrees from secular institutions. Many of them not being mission fit. They didn't have gone through any education in the mission ministry. And so that's a big challenge. And look at the last reason for the context and need, lack of empirical studies in mid-level leadership in Catholic higher education. I said this phenomenon, 50, 60 years old, relatively new. The existing studies have mostly been in the top leadership, presidents. And now it's important to have a second wave level of leadership with the mid-level leaders. And so this provides me the context for this study. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is the purpose statement of the study. The purpose of this interpretative phenomenological study was to explore the lived experiences of academic lay leaders. I've highlighted that term, I'll come back to that, of Catholic universities in San Antonio, 3 of them. 3 universities who integrate the mission and identity of the university that they are part of. I highlighted those terms because I need to articulate and define what those terms really mean in the study. By the term academic leadership, mid-level leadership, what I mean is deans downwards in that hierarchy of leadership, associate deans, directors, chairs, and coordinators. So that's the kind of sample that I'm studying. And I'm also defining laity in a very broad sense. Not only lay leaders from Catholic Church, Catholic community, laity from all religions, non-Catholic, non-Christians, and so very, very broad definition that I given for laity in this study. Let's go to the research question next. I began the study with this question. So what are the lived experiences of academic leaders of Catholic University of San Antonio who integrate the mission and identity of the university that they're part of? So these were the sub-questions. What are their life-affirming experiences? What are their challenging experiences? How do they respond to those challenges? So what interconnection do they find between their personal calling, their vocation, and commitment to the university's mission and identity? And what meaning do they ascribe to their lived experience? Let's look at the available knowledge in this area today. Sustaining and nurturing mission and identity is a very important challenge for Catholic higher education today because of many factors. I mentioned the declining number of priests and religious, and at the same time, of course, increasing number of lay leaders who are unfamiliar with the Catholic tradition. And thirdly, acceptance of federal funds and incentives, and they come with certain conditions, right? And also temptation to conform also to the secular norms of higher education, and that might sometimes run into the danger of watering down, Catholic identity. Secondly, the lack of adequate training and preparation for lay leaders in Catholic mission and character. Leaders, because of their experience, because of their skill sets, because of their competency, very especially in the areas of business, law, administration, and in areas of fundraising, their experience really does well in Catholic higher education. That has been the finding from studies that are available. And interestingly, most studies also use qualitative methods, very especially phenomenology, and that some way validates my use of the methodology in this particular study. And Catholic higher education and this religious, ethical, and intellectual tradition cannot be ignored. In other terms, why should we care about Catholic higher education? Why is this so very important? Literature says the world view that Catholic higher education offers, it is grounded in divine revelation as against the secular relativistic world view out there in the world. In some way reduces religion and faith as subjective and private. Catholic higher education talks about the unity of truth. Education some way based on the transcendent grounding and interaction between faith and intellectual inquiry. And that's what the Catholic higher education offers, which is certainly a viable alternative to the education that the world out there offers. And so it's certainly very important to have it because we need to counter the overwhelming relativism out there in the world. And that's the reason why it's important to have 260 plus Catholic colleges and universities in this country. Okay, so let's also look at the gap in literature. There is very limited empirical studies on lay leadership in Catholic higher education, on academic lay leadership, in the mid-level leadership. There's practically no studies conducted. No empirical studies on mission integration of leaders, Catholic higher education from non-Catholic and non-Christian religious affiliations. So that's the kind of crowd that I'm studying. The reason why I ventured into this study is not merely the gap in literature. There's something more important here. There's a compelling reason why I looked at this study. Look at these numbers. In 17 years, nearly 34% of the number of priests and religious have actually gone down. And so the study in some way addresses a real crisis concerning the identity of 260 Catholic colleges and universities here in this country that have 900,000 students enrolled. And so we're talking about a big thing here. We're trying to find out a solution to a problem out there in the world. Okay, it's looking for solutions to a critical issue, and getting laity on board is the only viable solution in sight. Okay, so that's the reason for this study. It wasn't merely an intellectual exercise, but something that was really practically grounded in the need of the church and education. Okay, this might look a little bit technical. Let me try to explain this in simple terms. This concerns the credibility of the study. We certainly need to have protocols in place to do the study, to make sure your findings are actually based on philosophical knowledge and also protocols. Broadly, it's phenomenology that is used as a methodology in this. Phenomenology developed as a philosophical branch of study, and Edmund Husserl is the father of phenomenology. He propagated a phenomenological approach which is transcendental. In simple terms, descriptive. Phenomena means things as you see, things as they appear in your consciousness. In other words, experience. And so you go out there, talk to people, listen to people about their experience, and learn from their experience. So that's the approach. That is phenomenology. Broadly speaking, two approaches to phenomenology. Husserl's transcendental descriptive phenomenology. No possibility of interpreting anything there. Describe your experience, and there it stops. And the disciple of Husserl, Heidegger, he argued, by the very fact that you put your experience into words, you speak about it, you write about it, it becomes an interpretation. By the very use of language, you actually are interpreting. And so two broad ways of phenomenology. One is descriptive, and the other is interpretative. Now, this approach that I'm using here, IPA, interpretative phenomenological analysis, it was actually propagated by Smith in the 1990s. It began in psychology, but now it's very broadly used in social sciences. I searched for the number of dissertations that have been done in ProcQuest dissertation database, and I found there are over 28,000 results that I find, those many number of dissertations that have been done in this methodology. And so it's a methodology that is really catching up. And the ontological approach, what do I mean by ontology? Study of the nature of reality, what is there to be known. And so the ontological approach that we are using here is social constructivism. In other words, creation of reality is by the individual experience influenced by one's own history and culture, one's own experience. So that is social constructivism. And epistemology. So how do we reach knowledge? How do we know what we know? Interpretation, so I spoke about it. Methodology generally is qualitative. Participant selection was purposive. So when I wanted to find out the experience of lay people in these three universities, how do I get to them? How do I know their experiences are credible? So Dr. Nari was one who suggested the best people that you could approach, gatekeepers. Go to the vice presidents of mission ministry in these three universities. They will guide you to the best people, and that's what I did. I approached the vice presidents of mission ministry in all the three universities. They suggested, and I went ahead and met. So, purposely, people being lay men and women who have been in this university for considerable number of years have made tremendous amount of contribution to mission and ministry in the university. So that's, and I go to them through the vice presidents of mission and ministry. Data collection, two semi-structured, in-depth interviews and also their demographic data sheet. All these conversations put together, nearly 200 hours of data. That took me over 200 hours. 20 hours of conversation that took me over 200 hours to transcribe that data. So that's the data that we're talking about. Okay, so that's about it. I think I cracked the technical part of it. Okay. Now, the demographics, participant demographics. Okay, we had 9 participants, 5 males and 4 females. Catholics, 4 of them, non-Catholic Christians, 4 of them. So there was a Hindu, and 5 whites, 1 Latino, 2 Asian Indians, an African American. Average age 53. Leadership level, 4 of them deans, directors, chairs 5. Their average experience in higher education, that is including Catholic and non-Catholic higher education, 20 years. Average leadership experience in the university is understudy, 15.5 years. 4 from St. Mary's, 2 from Our Lady of the Lake, 2 from UIW, 1 from both UIW experiences, both in UIW and St. Mary's. Okay, how do I make sure that my findings are credible, that I block my personal excitements, I don't actually let my experiences intervene in the study. Bracketing and reflexivity, my pre-knowledge and experience won't interfere, perception won't interfere with the findings. I made sure on a regular basis I was reflective, I have journal writing. All the interviews, after I transcribe, I send through email to all the participants to make sure I have on record what they really said. And there were interviews, 2 member checking interviews after the findings. After I had written the findings, after I sent it out to everyone, and with 2 of them I had a member checking interview. Manuscript was approved by all the participants. After I finished writing chapters 4 and 5, I sent to all the 9, got their approval. And 8 participants preferred to use their real names in the study. Okay? And also used a software that is as a means to triangulate the findings through categorization and frequency of chords and themes. So what have I found out? So a 6-stage model of mission integration in terms of IPA, it's called superordinate themes. What we mean by superordinate themes is the overarching super themes. 6 superordinate themes, and there are some 22 sub-themes under them. A higher ranking cluster of dominant ideas brought together. So that's what we mean by a superordinate theme. Now, when I say this is actually starting from number 1 all the way going to number 6. I see it as a progressive growth of mission and identity integration. Now, at the same time, I must also make a disclaimer. This progress is not linear. You would find elements of, stage 2 in stage all the way to championing the mission. Now, I want to give you an example of how I spoke about, how it is not linear. Even within the text itself, you will get multiple interwoven themes. I just want to cite one example. Look at this. This is an experience of a participant visiting the founder's place in France. Okay, Marine is visiting founder's place in France. And he said this: to be able to go to France and to see this world at the dawn of a revolution and to think through the lens of this young priest and his experiences, the persecution, and go to Spain and think of what it means to be in exile, to be fairly impoverished, and to live on the charity of others and then to return. That's a valuable experience for me. I suddenly came very much to find peace there because I began to understand that there's a completely different type of charism from the ones that I was used to. So this can be interpreted as nurturing mission consciousness, can be interpreted as experiencing disorienting dilemma, can also be interpreted into assimilating the mission. Just to cite an example of how text can be interwoven with multiple themes here. Now we'll go with each of those themes. I will give you a snippet, a couple of snippets of the data and what those themes are. Forming values and beliefs, the first one, the first stage. My family was always asking the question, what are you doing that is more than just you? That is about forming a spirit of service, integrating fundamental values. I remember meeting Rosa Parks, civil rights leader, and so that experience really connected me with, it wasn't about her being a civil rights leader, it was about her having faith in God to get through these trials and tribulations. The second one, experiencing disorienting dilemmas. We have two sub-themes there, experiences somewhere throughout their life. The big influence on what I do now, and I remember seeing a lot of poverty. I know people that just didn't have anything. The experience of encountering social issues and poverty. And look at the next one. That relates to a personal experience of a personal dark moment in one of the participants' life. So within that period, I call also my dark period, I went through a horrible emotional, physical, and psychological, you name it, relationship that I was in for a significant amount of time, and I knew it wasn't right. So there was a shame and stigma coming with the territory being Latina, that I would disappoint my parents. Third one, nurturing mission consciousness. Four sub-themes there, a formative experience. After they enter the Catholic University, the formative experiences. Okay, I go to a lot of Marinist funerals, and some of it is, I don't know who is helping whom. I'm supposed to be there praying for these guys in the casket, right? It's actually the men and women in those caskets that turn around and continue straightening your head out. I've barely made a dent in the body of work. These men and women have given faithfully for so long, and they become pretty powerfully inspiring examples from the founding religious order. Second one is very on Marinist Social Justice Collaborative Meeting, an organization he himself was part of. He was a co-founder of this organization. Talks about being part of that meeting, how exciting he was about that meeting. And that organization still exists. I couldn't wait to get to these meetings because lay people, former professors, balanced with men and women. Man, everybody committed to social justice and non-violence. That was incredibly uplifting. So that encouraged me to want to learn as much as I could about the Marinists and to get more involved with the Marinists. Assimilating the mission, 4 themes, a continuous process of mission integration. I keep asking, part of my reflection and part of my own work in silence is trying to listen, just to being open, the centering prayer, listening to what I have to, and to sit back and listen to what the Holy Spirit is trying to tell me. That's about interiorizing through reflective engagement. I always talk about from day one, I don't see this as a career. This isn't job, this is ministry, and in the end, you have that purpose, okay? Experiencing a compelling sense of purpose. Owning the mission, again, for sub-themes there, growing in personal ownership. You own it up as your mission as your personal thing. I have very strong colleagues that are faculty and staff that I have developed a relationship with them. We often talk about the space that we are in, especially since we are not Catholic, and it's always been positive for us. I've been able to know that this space is definitely inclusive to all. I think I'm beginning to better articulate my role in my identity in the mission. What I'm doing for it, I think the mission is a journey. I don't think you ever really get to the top. I think it's just a continuous evolution, and the way I see the mission now is completely different from when I first began. Championing the mission. I want to give back. I just want to give back, but at the same time, I want to do it without ego. I want this to be an ego trip, or this is about me. What I really want to do is just make a difference. For me, I simply wake up every day and say, I'm going to read the Beatitudes from the Gospel, Matthew chapter 5, right? And then I'm going to go about my day hoping that they remain present in what I do, what I say, who I am, but trying to again be an example to students, be an exemplar. Okay. All right, so we need to revisit our research question at this junction. So this is how we began this research. At this stage, we found out, yes, these are the lived experiences. And so what do we do with this experience? So came up with a question for stage 2. So how do the mission and identity integration experiences of academic leaders serve in sustaining, strengthening, and transmitting Catholic University's mission and identity? In other words, how can we replicate the experiences of these leaders? How do we imitate someone? Of course, through their behaviors. And so that was our next approach. We looked at the data all over again, looked at the stage model, and then, this is what we found out. A behavioral competency model that begins with moral self-identity development, goes all the way to immersion in wholehearted service. I will talk about this by presenting a model of how these key behaviors emerge. The 3 on the right-hand side need to be seen as their formative experiences, and the 2 on the left-hand side, their involvement in action, if that makes sense. Okay, and so they're developing moral self-identity, their reflective practice that feeds it. Okay, and they're acculturating into mission and values of Catholic University. Their reflective practice actually strengthens it, and the result is they build impactful relationship within the university, outside there, and they also reach out to people. They immerse in wholehearted service. So that's a kind of trajectory that I found out. Now, let's go to the conceptual framework. So how can I explain this finding with the existing, some of the leading theories that are in existence today? And so my conceptual framework was actually an integrated framework of these 5 leading theories. Okay. First is virtue ethics. It's a theory that talks about how we acquire virtue through practice. A lifelong process of continual moral learning is what virtue ethics talks about. Secondly, organizational assimilation theory by Jablin. It talks about 3 stages of organization acculturation, which somewhere runs parallel to the findings of this study. First one is anticipatory socialization, which means all the experiences that a person has prior to entering the organization, in this case, entering the university. Secondly, encounter. That stage is actually the training and orientation that the person receives. And thirdly, metamorphosis, transformation. The person being with the organization for a considerable amount of time, integrates deeply into the organization, that becomes a transformative experience. This some way aligns with the stage model that I had presented to you before. So that's the second theory in this conceptual framework. And reflective practice. Reflective practice, it developed from the experiential learning theories of duty and call. That is true experience that people learn. And Scone, what he has done is he related experiential learning and reflective practice into professional practice. In other words, intentional examination of your prior beliefs and assumptions. Your intentional reflection will certainly help you become a better practitioner, is the theory of Scone, reflective practice. Person organization fit, PO, value alignment, alignment between the congruence between the values of the individual and the values of the organization. The organization provides the person what he or she needs. Similarly, that person provides what the organization needs. So value alignment there. And lastly, servant leadership. A number of theories on leadership. But this was a theory that developed against a hierarchical power relationship. Looked at a leader as a servant first, the other oriented approach to leadership, service and altruism. So these are 5 theories put together into the conceptual framework. Okay. Quickly to I spoke about what those characteristics are, and then connection to a stage model and theories. Some of those other theories also got in here. So that's how the discussions are being developed. Now, 5 major key findings, key takeaways from my study. This is number 1. Reflective practice. The Catholic University environment and interventions initiated the mission and identity integration process in academic lay leaders, and their disposition for reflective practice deepened that experience. Number 2 talks about a compelling purpose. The lay academic leaders' engagement with the mission of the Catholic University is positively related to their search for meaning and purpose in life. There is that connect between their personal mission and the mission of the university. Relationality, the relational dimension, sense of community, building relationships, that is integral to the mission and the identity integration experience of academic lay leaders. 4, servant leadership that we spoke about. The behaviors of the academic lay leaders who integrate the mission and the identity of university align with the behavioral competencies of the servant leadership model. And number 5, the support for mission. Academic lay leaders across religious affiliations sustain and strengthen the following mission aspects of a Catholic university: service, social justice, inclusion, pluralism, Catholic intellectual tradition, and Catholic social teaching. So these are the 5 key findings of the study. So what do we do with these findings? So what are the implications? What could be done with the findings of the study? For leadership theory, I would say the 3 things, like the stage model of progressive integration, and also the behavioral competency model, and the conceptual framework, that I believe are unique contribution to leadership scholarship from this study. Secondly, the value of personal narratives, that I believe is a contribution to the study, to the scholarship as well. Personal experience, the narrative experiences, that has great potential. It adds to the constructivist research paradigm, and that's certainly a contribution. It adds to experiential narratives. Recently there is this developing area of study, scholarly reflective narratives, SRN. This some way contributes to that branch of study as well. More importantly, the practical implications, the findings, the study, certainly a tool for reflection and intentional conversation, learning from shared experiences. These are men and women who are doing quite a lot of stuff outside their classrooms. And how many people in the universities actually know it? And so I believe they will have to be provided formal platforms to articulate their experiences. There has to be greater learning from their experiences. And so this some way becomes an eye-opening reality for universities to learn from great experiences of committed lay leaders. To recognize and value and empower lay leadership, some way develop lay leadership, and I would say even go to the extent of institutionalizing mission practices, policies. If an institute is really serious about its mission, then I would even say tenure and promotion will have to be some way related to faculty and leaders' contribution to a mission and identity. Involve these people, and also elements of mission and identity and strategic succession planning, and this also has implications for the ecclesial lay ministry of the church. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this becomes a great avenue, a great opportunity for church to strengthen lay ministry, involve lay leaders in Catholic higher education. Okay. For future research, this can be replicated with alternative research samples, say with trustees, with presidents, with faculty, with students, with alumni. That could be done. Alternative research sites with other Catholic universities. When we talk about Catholic university, there are different kinds of Catholic universities. Say, for example, Catholic University of America is different from UIW. Notre Dame, the Catholicity there is very different from what it is here. And so, if we could replicate this study, it would be interesting to find out how the experience of lay leaders in those universities are. Okay, could be another possibility is alternative research methods. Constructive grounded theory could be an approach that is very close to IPA. Many other different ways of conducting this study. An in-depth study of the challenges of integration. This study, as you had seen, the broad approach was very, very positive. With people, in the first place, we found out who are the lay leaders who really integrated the Catholic mission and identity. And so we first found out the positive experience of people and then a hard conversation. And we certainly know there will be many others who find it extremely difficult to integrate. And so it's good to find out the other side of the story as well. Okay. The study focused on specific areas of mission activities, say for example, mission in curriculum, mission in community service, mission in research in particular areas could be a possibility. Scope for a longitudinal study, say for example, a new faculty who comes into an institution, the first 3 to 5 years of experience, conduct a study, a longitudinal study is a possibility, and the servant leadership models, the relationship to leadership in Catholic higher education. We found out servant leadership model is a prominent model of the participants of the study, and that model somewhere relates to the gospel values as well. And so pretty interesting to find out how that model relates to leadership in Catholic higher education. There could be a lot more. I just limited to these 7 for future research. Limitations, the sampling diversity, I mentioned 8 out of the 9 were deans and chairs. We didn't have representation from faculty, from staff, and so there is that limitation of the samples. And I would also say analytical limitation in qualitative study. You can't claim complete and comprehensive analysis. Say for example, another person who does a similar study could find out things slightly different from what I have found out. And so there is certainly that limitation. Okay. We're nearly coming to the close of it. My personal experience, very heartwarming and inspiring experiences. Just sat and listened to this experience of these lay people. I've been immensely touched and inspired by their stories, the commitment of those lay leaders. And so this has been a journey of personal self-reflection for me. Also look at what I could do with this when I go back to India. And some may also reaffirm my faith in qualitative inquiry. I should admit, up until the time I came here, I didn't know anything much about qualitative inquiry. And so, and I fell in love with it. And so, very passionate about finding out through qualitative. No problems against all of you guys who are in quantitative methods, no problems. But that I thought is my way of knowing. Okay? So that's it. So thank you, and I think I'm prepared for the question.
Thank you, brother. So we're going to ask a small number of questions, then we'll invite a couple questions from the audience. Could you go back to the behavioral model, not the diagram, but the slide right after that? There you go. No, the next one. There you go. Perfect. Those are the behavioral competencies, right, on the left?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, these competencies are all the practices that the lay leaders that you engaged with are actively doing. It's all the relationship building. It's all the things that they do that we want to learn more from that. Mm-hmm. Yet we know that in universities we're highly structured and often placed in categories and in locations where it doesn't always make that easy. So the urgency to really learn from this. What would you say are the most important and urgent changes that universities need to be talking about and enabling so that this sort of lay leadership can actually be possible and thrive in spite of all the institutional constraints for doing this?
I would say in the first place, trust the power of these lay leaders. Like I mentioned in my presentation, these are lay leaders who've done quite a lot outside their classrooms, going out on mission outreach programs outside the country, to the developing country, and going out to the neighborhood, doing quite a lot of things. And so there is quite a lot we certainly need to learn from them, and they certainly need to be provided formal opportunities to actually articulate that experience